The wind howled through the dense forest, whipping snowflakes across the road as if nature itself was trying to keep them away. But that wasn't enough to deter Gabriel. His sister, Maya, sat quietly beside him in the car, her eyes fixed on the narrow, winding path ahead. The tension between them was palpable. The sibling bond they once shared had slowly frayed over the years, worn down by old wounds and unresolved grief. Yet, here they were, traveling to the one place they thought could finally put the past to rest, an isolated cabin deep in the mountains. They hadn't spoken much during the drive, the silence only broken by the occasional murmur of the engine and the crackle of the radio. Gabriel had suggested the trip as a way to reconnect. Maya hadn't objected, but her reluctance was written all over her face. She wasn't sure what she was hoping to find at the cabin, but she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. "Are you sure about this?" Maya asked, her voice barely audible over the storm. Gabriel glanced over at her, the weight of their shared past heavy in his heart. "We have to face it, Maya. We've avoided this place for far too long. It's time to confront the truth." The truth. The reason they had stayed away from the cabin all these years, the reason it had become a forbidden place in their memories. Their family's dark history, the events that led to the tragic death of their parents. The house was supposed to hold the answers, answers that had eluded them for too long. As the cabin came into view through the swirling snow, an uneasy feeling settled over Gabriel. The place hadn't changed much over the years. The wooden structure was weathered and worn, but it still stood, as if daring them to uncover its secrets. The moment Gabriel parked the car, the air grew colder, the silence around them unnervingly thick. Maya hesitated, staring at the cabin, her breath misting in the cold. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she admitted. Gabriel opened the car door. "We have to be. For us." With that, they stepped out into the snow, their footsteps crunching on the frozen ground. The door to the cabin creaked open, and a gust of wind howled through the trees, as though warning them to turn back. But they didn't listen. Inside, the scent of dust and aged wood hung in the air. The furniture was old but intact, as if frozen in time. The living room was dark, with only the dim light from the storm outside illuminating the space. Gabriel set down his bag and glanced at his sister, who stood by the door, clutching her coat tightly around her. "It's just a house," he said, his voice attempting to mask the unease he felt. "We're here to get answers." But as they stepped further into the cabin, something heavy pressed on their hearts. There was something unnatural about this place, something that had always lurked just beyond their awareness. The past wasn't done with them yet. And neither was the curse. The door slammed shut behind them, the wind forcing it closed with an eerie force. Maya jumped, her heart racing, but Gabriel seemed unfazed, his eyes already scanning the cabin. The place felt different now, darker, more oppressive, as if it had been waiting for them. Maya couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She pulled her coat tighter around her body, her breath coming out in quick, shallow bursts. It wasn't just the cold. The air itself felt heavy with something unspeakable. The creaking of the floorboards echoed through the silence, and she glanced over at Gabriel, his back turned as he examined the old furniture. "Are you sure we should be here?" Maya asked, her voice trembling slightly. She didn't want to admit it, but the hairs on the back of her neck were standing up. The cabin didn't feel like a place of refuge, it felt like a trap. Gabriel turned to her, his expression unreadable. "We don't have a choice, Maya. If we want to understand what happened, we need to be here. You know that." He walked over to the fireplace, a relic of the past, and ran his hand over the old stone. He stared into the dim embers, his thoughts distant. He had always been the strong one, the protector, but this place had a way of making him feel small. Vulnerable. Maya looked around the room again. The walls, lined with faded portraits of people she couldn't recognize, seemed to stare back at her. The cabin wasn't just a house, it was a museum of their family's tragic history. The tragedy that had led to their parents' untimely deaths and the curse that had followed them all these years. Gabriel finally broke the silence. "Let's check the rest of the cabin. There might be something we missed." Maya nodded and followed him through the narrow hallway, the floorboards groaning under their weight. Each room felt colder than the last, the walls seeming to close in around them. They reached the back of the house, where a narrow staircase led to the attic. The door at the top was half open, creaking in the wind. "Should we go up?" Maya asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Gabriel hesitated, then nodded. "We have to. This is where it all began." They climbed the stairs slowly, the creaking growing louder with every step. As they reached the top, Gabriel pushed the door open. The attic was dark, save for the faint moonlight filtering through a cracked window. Dust hung in the air like smoke, and the floor was littered with old belongings covered in sheets. Maya shivered, but Gabriel's eyes were fixed on a particular object, a large, ornate mirror standing against the far wall. The moment he saw it, something in his chest tightened. This was no ordinary mirror. He recognized it instantly. It was their mother's. Suddenly, Maya gasped, her voice filled with panic. "Gabriel, look!" The mirror had shifted slightly, as though it was watching them. And for a moment, Gabriel could swear that he saw something, someone, reflected in its glass. A shadow. But it wasn't them. Before he could respond, the temperature dropped sharply. The lights flickered, and the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Something was in the cabin with them. And it wasn't human. Gabriel and Maya froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. The air in the attic grew thick, suffocating, as if the very walls were closing in on them. The footsteps grew louder, closer, as though something, someone, was moving toward them from the shadows. Gabriel turned to Maya, his eyes wide with fear. "Maya, do you hear that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. She nodded, her breath quick and shallow. "What is it? What's happening?" Suddenly, the door at the top of the stairs slammed shut. The cold air grew even more intense, and the sound of whispering filled the room. Gabriel's gaze shifted back to the mirror, which now seemed to ripple like water disturbed by unseen hands. "Get away from the mirror," Maya shouted, pulling Gabriel back. But it was too late. The mirror seemed to suck the light from the room, and Gabriel felt a cold presence envelope him, seeping into his bones. His skin prickled as the whispers grew louder, surrounding him, until it felt like they were coming from inside his mind. Suddenly, something cold and clammy gripped his arm. He turned, but there was nothing there, only darkness. A loud bang echoed through the cabin. The floorboards beneath them trembled, and Gabriel stumbled backward, pulling Maya with him. Then came the voice. A guttural, distorted voice, like 1,000 souls trapped in agony. "You should never have come back." Gabriel and Maya exchanged a terrified glance. The curse had returned, and this time, it wouldn't let them go so easily. The world around them seemed to distort, spinning out of control as Gabriel and Maya tried to make sense of what was happening. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and the temperature in the cabin plunged to near freezing. Panic rose within them, but they had no choice but to face the terrifying truth that had haunted their family for generations. Gabriel grabbed Maya's hand and pulled her toward the attic door, but it wouldn't budge. They were trapped. "We need to get out of here," Maya cried, her voice cracking. Gabriel looked around the room, searching for a way out. That's when he saw it, an old journal, buried beneath a pile of dust and forgotten belongings. He snatched it up and flipped it open, his eyes scanning the pages. The words were faded, but the meaning was clear. The family curse. Their ancestors had made a pact with a dark spirit, one that had bound their souls to the cabin. The curse was meant to protect the family, but it had gone horribly wrong. Their parents had tried to break the curse before their deaths, but they failed. The dark spirit had claimed them, and now it was hunting the siblings. We have to break the curse, Gabriel said, his voice determined. Maya swallowed hard, her eyes wide with fear. How do we do that? How do we stop something so powerful? Gabriel scanned the journal's pages again. There was a ritual mentioned, one that could break the curse, but it required confronting the spirit and offering something valuable in return. Their parents had tried it, but it hadn't worked. The price had been too high, and now, the spirit had returned to claim the children. We have no choice, Gabriel said, his voice low and steady. We have to face it head-on. If this thing is bound to the cabin, maybe destroying the source will weaken it. Maya's grip on his hand tightened, but she nodded. Despite the terror clawing at her chest, she understood. This was the only way to stop it. To put an end to the nightmare. They heard another creak from the attic, but this time, it wasn't just the floorboards. Something was moving, something much heavier. A low, guttural growl echoed in the silence, and the room seemed to tremble. The spirit was close. Gabriel grabbed the journal, flipping through the pages to find any final instructions. His mind raced, trying to piece together what little information he could find. Finally, he stopped on a page that detailed the spirit's weakness. It could only be banished if it was confronted in the place it had once been summoned, where the curse had originated. The mirror. It was the key to breaking the cycle. We have to go back to the mirror, Gabriel said urgently. That's where it all began. Maya, still shaking with fear, nodded. Let's do it. I'm ready. The two of them moved toward the attic door again, but as they reached for the handle, the air around them seemed to snap, the silence broken by a deafening roar. The mirror on the far wall vibrated violently, the glass shattering with a sharp, echoing crash. From the fragments, a black, swirling smoke poured out, like a dark cloud given form, and within it, the twisted face of the spirit emerged. It was ancient. Its hollow eyes stared into theirs, and its lips curled into a twisted grin. Its voice was like 1,000 voices wailing in agony. You cannot escape me. You should have never returned. With a sudden surge of strength, Gabriel grabbed Maya's arm and pulled her toward the broken mirror. He didn't know what would happen next, but he had to try. We have to face it together, he said, his voice filled with determination. Maya's eyes locked onto his. We're in this together. Together, they approached the swirling darkness of the spirit, their fear boiling into a determination to survive. The room around them began to fade, the air growing thicker, and then. The moment they stepped into the swirling mass of darkness, the temperature dropped sharply, and their surroundings began to distort. The once familiar attic now felt like a cold, forgotten tomb. The darkness pressed in on them, suffocating, filling their lungs with an ancient dread. Gabriel could feel the weight of the spirit pressing against them, its presence suffusing the air like smoke. His heart raced, but he forced himself to focus. They had no choice but to keep moving forward. This was their chance to finally end it all. As they walked, the whispers grew louder, becoming clearer. Voices filled the space around them, but they weren't the comforting voices of their parents. No, these were taunting, angry voices, hurling insults at them, trying to break their resolve. You think you can defeat me, the spirit hissed, its voice wrapping around them like a vice. You cannot escape your bloodline. You are mine, just as your parents were. The voices seemed to come from all directions now, echoing in Gabriel's mind. He couldn't tell where they were coming from, but they were everywhere, inside and outside his thoughts. The spirit was trying to break them, to make them doubt themselves, but he refused to let it succeed. The air grew thick with shadow, and the temperature dropped even further. The frost on the floor seemed to spread, creeping up the walls. The light that had once been in the cabin was now gone, replaced by an oppressive, suffocating darkness that seemed to swallow every trace of warmth. Gabriel, Maya's voice cracked, and he turned to see her standing in the thickening shadows, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. It's inside me. I can feel it. No, Maya, Gabriel said, his voice firm, even though his heart was racing. You're stronger than this. We can't let it take us. The spirit's laughter echoed in their ears, a low, guttural sound that reverberated in their bones. You think you can fight me? I've been waiting for this moment for centuries. The darkness closed in on them, but Gabriel could see something now, shimmering just ahead. It was the faint reflection of the broken mirror. The spirit was bound to it, just like the journal had said. If they could destroy it, they could break the curse once and for all. But as they moved closer, the spirit grew more violent. The shadows writhed and twisted, taking on monstrous forms. Figures reached out of the darkness, their hands grabbing at them, pulling them backward. Gabriel fought to keep his grip on Maya, but the darkness was relentless. Maya, we have to reach the mirror. Gabriel shouted, pulling her through the cold fog. But as they neared the mirror, something changed. The spirit's form solidified in front of them, its twisted face contorted in rage. It reached for them, its hands skeletal and clawed, its eyes burning with fury. You cannot defeat me, it snarled. I am your past. I am your family's torment. Gabriel could feel it, its power, its influence. It was trying to consume them. But they weren't going to let it. With every ounce of strength he had left, Gabriel pushed forward, dragging Maya behind him. They reached the shattered mirror, and as they did, the darkness seemed to recoil, as if the mirror itself had become the battleground. We have to destroy it. Gabriel yelled. Together, they reached down, grabbing the jagged pieces of the shattered mirror and lifting them high. The spirit's rage surged, its voice howling in fury, but it was too late. With a final, desperate cry, they slammed the mirror pieces into the ground. The cabin shook violently, the darkness ripping away like a veil. For a moment, it felt like the world was ending. But then, as quickly as it had come, the darkness faded. The air grew warm again, and the oppressive weight lifted from their shoulders. The spirit was gone. But even as the darkness faded, Gabriel could feel the weight of the curse still lingering in the air. The cabin was silent now, but the silence was different. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. They had done it, they had faced the spirit and destroyed the mirror. But the past wasn't done with them yet. Maya collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. Her body trembled with exhaustion, but there was a sense of relief in her eyes. We did it, she whispered. We ended it. Gabriel stood over her, his heart still pounding in his chest. He didn't know if he could ever escape the feeling that the curse had left something behind, something more dangerous than the spirit itself. But they had won. The spirit, the curse, all of it, was gone. For a moment, Gabriel allowed himself to breathe, to let the weight of what had happened settle over him. But he knew that even though they had faced their worst fears, the scars would remain. They had come to the cabin to face the past, and now, they were free. The curse was broken. But the battle against their memories, against the loss of their parents and everything they had once held dear, had only just begun. The storm outside had calmed by the time Gabriel and Maya stepped out of the cabin. The snow had stopped falling, and the air was still, the only sound the crunch of their boots on the frozen ground. But despite the silence, there was a heaviness in the air, as though the world had been holding its breath. They had broken the curse, but there was no real victory to be had. The darkness had been vanquished, but the wounds it left behind would take time to heal. Gabriel knew that the journey they had just undergone was only the beginning of their healing process. Maya walked alongside him, her face pale but determined. The weight of the past still hung on her, but now, there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. They had survived. And maybe that was enough. As they made their way back to the car, the sun began to break through the clouds, casting a soft golden light over the snowy landscape. It was as if the world was beginning to thaw, to move on from the nightmare that had consumed them. Gabriel turned to Maya, his voice quiet but resolute. We're free now. She nodded, her eyes reflecting the same strength he felt inside. "We are. And we'll rebuild. Together." And as they drove away from the cabin, leaving the past behind, Gabriel couldn't help but feel that, for the first time in a long time, the future was full of possibilities. As Gabriel and Maya drove away from the cabin, the weight of the past finally began to lift. The curse that had haunted their family for generations was gone, and with it, the oppressive darkness that had once clouded their lives. They were free, free from the spirit, free from the fear that had defined their every waking moment since their parents' mysterious deaths. The road ahead, though uncertain, now felt like a new beginning. Gabriel glanced over at Maya, her expression no longer consumed by the terror that had taken hold of her earlier. There was still a trace of sadness in her eyes, but also a spark of hope, a hope that had been rekindled in the battle for survival, in their shared strength, and in the promise of what they could rebuild together. He took a deep breath, letting the crisp, cool air flood his lungs, as if for the first time he was breathing without a sense of impending doom. The cabin, the mirrors, the tormenting presence, they were behind them now, part of a dark chapter they would never forget, but one that no longer controlled their lives. "We'll get through this," Gabriel said softly, more to himself than to Maya, but she heard him, and her response came almost immediately, her voice stronger than before. "We will," she agreed, her gaze focused on the horizon ahead. "We're survivors." The road was long, but they didn't need to rush. There was time now to heal, time to process the unimaginable horrors they had witnessed and to rebuild their lives, step by step. As they continued their journey, the weight of the night's terror slowly dissolved, replaced by the knowledge that they had conquered something far greater than the spirit itself. They had faced their own fears and come out on the other side, together. The world was still vast, but now it felt more open, less suffocating. And as they drove further away from the cabin, the setting sun cast a warm glow over the landscape, symbolizing the end of the long, dark night they had endured. No, it wasn't over. The journey would continue, but they had won the most important battle. And as Gabriel and Maya drove toward an uncertain future, they knew one thing for sure: no matter what came next, they would face it side by side, stronger than before. The past would not define them, their resilience, their love, and their unity would. And for the first time in a long while, Gabriel smiled. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed the thrilling journey of Gabriel and Maya. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an adventure. Check out the videos appearing on your screen for more heart-pounding stories. Stay tuned and stay safe.